Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everybody in between. Paranormal weather.
Yeah, it's a bit nippy.
Is a bit nippy. It's also been a bit wet and a bit dry.
Right.
Is it a Sasquatch vigorously toweling themselves down?
Yes, or maybe fattening up for the coming winter.
I've been fattening up for the coming winter. Yeah. I've been doing it. I started in 2014.
Yeah, I've been doing it for most of my life.
I feel very prepared for winter now.
We got a new Patreon as well, haven't we, that we haven't mentioned yet?
Yes, we have. Teresa Gunderson, thank you so much.
Oh, that's so brilliant. Thank you for joining the Patreon programme. We really appreciate it. Early access to the podcast, ad-free, and little other bits and pieces that we post on there. So not only if you join, do you help us out, but you do get something in return. So that's great. If you fancy becoming a Patreon, go to patreon.com/TQM pod. There's the plug.
And if you are hearing this early, that is because you are a patron, and thank you for being one.
Yeah, I can't get my head around that thing.
No, I know, it's so weird. We've got a little bit ahead of ourselves in recording.
Yeah, so we're all completely confused.
We are. So, Teresa, I know you've been a patron for a couple of weeks, but Christmas is coming up, and it means we have to get ahead of ourselves. Otherwise we'll be recording on Christmas Day.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Before we crack on for today's episode, I just... I've been noticing a bit of a trend. You know, you get these little trends in paranormal news that are in the kind of tabloids or mainstream press.
Sure, yeah.
The one I've noticed at the moment, there's a lot of alien skeletons about, aren't there?
There's so many alien skeletons, yes, yeah. So a lot of them from Peru.
Yeah, there's a lot of the South American skeletons out there. It was obviously a hotbed of alien activity.
It is. I think we'll cover that one when the noise has died down a bit. As far as I can tell, people can't work out whether it really is truly an alien, because they did present it to a congressional committee, basically.
Yeah.
Or, as I've heard, it's also potentially llama bones rearranged. So look, I'm not calling it. I haven't investigated. I've just heard.
Yeah.
But
it's probably something we do need to get into, though, isn't it?
It is.
At some point. Well, it does segue us quite nicely for the theme of today, because it is a bit UFO themed, and it came about, I don't know if you're the same, Ben, but when it comes to UFO encounters, I tend to think about the United States.
Yeah.
You got the Roswell incident, Area 51, Betty and Barney Hill, Phoenix Lights. But it's not just the volume of cases that makes America the UFO capital of the world. There is something about US UFO encounters that, for me, makes them somehow feel bigger and better than maybe their British counterparts, and I'm not quite sure why.
I think probably the glamour of, like, I guess those places where they happen, like Groom Lake, Roswell, New Mexico, they sound impossibly romantic to somebody who grew up in Cirencester.
Yeah, I think that's true. And those American stories do seem to have a bit of a Hollywood feel about them as well, don't they?
Yeah, some of them feel like they're produced for Hollywood almost.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking, well, there are amazing UFO stories from the UK. Somehow they don't feel as big screen as the American cases. They feel kind of British.
Well, maybe to give them a bit of a British buzz, maybe this bit we should have some Pathé News music behind us.
Yeah, something very Britishy. But when you look deeper into the British UFO encounters, they are just as intriguing and exciting as the American ones. So I wanted to feature some of these very British UFO cases today and work out why they feel so British.
Well, rather, I don't know how to be more British. I'll stiffen my upper lip.
Yeah, well, if you can get yourself a cup of tea, maybe toast yourself a crumpet, and we'll begin.
Okay, well, I've got a decaf coffee. That'll stand in as the tea.
You're letting the side down. Let's start with a story. Let's start with the story of John and Gloria Mann. Now, this story was featured in the British press in the late 1970s, And Ben, it takes place in our own backyard of Oxford, or Oxfordshire.
Oh, really?
Yes. On June the 19th, 1978, John Mann and his wife Gloria, their two daughters, Natasha and Tanya, and John's sister, Frances Farrow, left the home of John's mother at 9:30 in the evening. They were driving through Stanford-in-the-Vale near Wantage.
Oh, I know it well, yeah.
Yeah. There was little traffic on the road, so John had no doubt that they'd get home by 11:15 p.m. But around 10:15, as the car mounted a rise in the road at Stanford-in-the-Vale, John and Francis spotted a brilliant white light in the sky about a mile ahead. They drove on for a mile and the light didn't change its position. A red light started to flash on and off on the right side of where the white light was, which now seemed to be coming straight at them. John put on the handbrake of the car and leapt from the car with the engine still running. As he looked up, suddenly the moon was eclipsed by a pitch blackness, and John could hear a noise which he described as like a mixture of a swishing sound and the scoring noise of a train's wheels against a track.
That's interesting. We've heard that before in some cases.
Yeah, there's quite a lot in this case, actually, which we've heard before, which really struck me. The moon, so this thing was covering the moon reappeared, and he could make out a vast circular shape over 100 feet up in the sky, moving very slowly. It came directly over the car and then drifted over trees on the right into a field. Then the noise stopped. John got back into the car and had driven about 100 yards, this is weird, when he realised they were no longer on the familiar road home. Somehow they had been transported to a completely different road.
Again, very familiar, very familiar.
Yeah. So he describes the road was no longer straight, but wound up and down small rises with sharp bends. This is weird as well. He says, I had a strange feeling that if I took my hands off the wheel, the car would drive itself.
Yeah. I was listening to a case about this in Italy the other day. So in this particular case, the person was so convinced their car was being regularly elevated that they rigged up a system of wires that if the car was picked up by the body, it would break the wires.
Right.
And the wires broke.
Wow. So this was happening on multiple occasions?
This was happening on multiple occasions, yeah. And This person was driving to places in impossibly short amounts of time. Things that should take an hour were taking 20 minutes, and his friends were sort of going, how did you get here? You were only there 20 minutes ago. So, yeah, I have heard this before quite recently, but it was a case that happened in the 70s, that one.
Right, okay. Well, this is 70s as well. So we've got a bit of time loss coming up soon. So they drove onwards through several towns with this ball of brilliant white light pacing the car. It was about 200 feet to the right of them. This is very interesting as well. Whenever they approached houses or villages, the light would disappear, only to reappear once they were back on deserted roads.
Oh, man. I would be almost tempted to stay in... I mean, I suppose you can't, but... I mean, that's... that sort of level of consciousness and... observation is unnerving in itself.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as the car entered Cirencester, the lights disappeared and they didn't see it again during the last 20 minutes of their journey.
Second mention of Cirencester. How weird. I didn't know you were going to do a story which mentioned Cirencester.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow, okay.
So,
big up to Cirencester.
Yeah. Well, you can't get more British than Cirencester, do you? So a bit of time loss coming up. When they arrived home and looked at the clock, it was 12:15. An hour later than they should have arrived. Now, the next day, John decided to retrace their journey, but couldn't find the mysterious road or any landmarks from the night before. They later returned to the field where they thought the object had landed, but they found nothing. On the Thursday following the incident, John examined the lower part of his chest, which had been itching all day, and found a red band of heat spots. The following day, Gloria, his wife, had a similar rash on her left arm and leg from the knee down.
When you say heat spots, like in a regular pattern?
Yeah, that was the implication that I took from it. There wasn't much detail there wasn't any photos or anything of this, so I don't know.
Because we've seen some before, which is like almost like air from a heat vent.
Yeah.
Has burnt them. It sort of sounds like that's what I'm imagining.
Yeah. Well, Frances, who was John's sister, who was in the car, had been scratching her head and neck the day before John had found these things on his body. So she had something, but there was nothing on the children. Frances also had a 3-inch oval bruise on the outer side of her right knee. John and Gloria noticed similar dark blue marks in the same area on their legs, but within a few days the marks vanished.
Interesting. Wow. I mean, I say wow. I mean, we have heard it all before, but this is very close to home.
Yeah.
As previously noted, this is not impossibly romantic.
Well, we've driven these roads.
We've driven these roads. I mean, I was not on those roads in the 70s. Well, maybe I was as a baby, but I know exactly the sorts of roads. I mean, they are very bendy and windy around there. I mean, it's also worth noting it is a weird area. For those who don't know it, it's kind of on the cusp of the Wiltshire Downs, the Salisbury Downs, the Salisbury Plains, I should say, which is very military, but also contains places like Avebury and Stonehenge. So that is very close. You've also got the Harwell Research Laboratories there, and you've got, well, it's not there anymore, but what used to be one of the biggest coal-fired power stations in the country is there as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of kind of sort of, in inverted commas, stuff in that area.
Yeah, definitely. And stuff that has been associated with other UFO encounters as well.
Right.
Well, after these marks vanished, the next week their child Natasha woke up in the night confused and upset. It was the first of 3 or 4 nightmares in which she saw several strange people with funny eyes staring at her.
She was in Cirencester.
Yeah. After a couple of weeks, the nightmares stopped. At the end of June, John had a dream in which he saw himself driving along the mysterious winding road. He stopped in front of a brilliant beam of yellowish light coming from the sky, and they all walked into the beam and floated up into some sort of craft. They walked along a corridor until they reached 3 identical doors, and John entered one, Frances the other, and Gloria and the children the third. The room was dark, but John heard a voice telling him to sit, that he was going to have some sort of medical, and so were the others. He was aware of something attaching itself to his right leg below the knee. About 5 minutes, the leg clamp retracted and he returned to the corridor. The others came out and they all walked without speaking back to where they had entered. They then floated back down the shaft of light, got into their car and drove off. A couple of days later, his sister revealed that she had had a very similar dream.
It always, well, in this time, it always appears to go back to medical experiments, and they always puzzled me until when we looked at sort of more recent cases and people who sort of claim to have an insight into this. It's the part of the hybridization program. That's the terrifying bit of this, I think.
Yeah. Well, a few months later, John and Frances underwent hypnosis, and more detail of their encounter was revealed. John recalled encountering 3 men wearing close-fitting metallic silver suits with balaclava-type helmets. They had pale complexions and pale blue eyes. One of them said in perfect English, "Welcome to our ship. No harm will come to you. We wish to examine you." I'm not sure that kind of sentence works, does it?
Yeah, that doesn't sound ominous in any way.
All right, then. John stepped into a room with a sort of dentist chair in the middle. 2 women came in and one strapped him into the chair while the other was pressing buttons on a desk. An intense beam of light shone on his face, and one of the women pulled something black down from the ceiling. A woman's voice then woke him up, and a man came into the room and spoke to the woman in a strange language. The women said their names were Achilles and Cossentia, and the man's name was Anuxia. The man took John to the first room and about 50 people entered. Anuxia said that something was coming and they must move a short distance, and then the floor seemed to tip to the left. Later, John was taken to a large room, which Anuxia said was used for navigation, and he was shown a film of Anuxia's home. The film showed a desolated landscape of boulders and rocks, a craft emerging from parting rocks, and 6 figures dressed in monk-like habits carrying a crate. Anuxia said the crate was...
Sounds like a Christmas perfume advert.
Yeah. Anuxia said the crate was a coffin and the craft had come to collect the dead. The film ended and John went into another room where Francis, Gloria and the children were waiting. Francis recalls being taken into another room but remembers very little about the examination. A man named Uxulia, I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation, but I don't think he's going to complain.
If he does, we've got a scoop.
Yeah. A man named Uxulia, who said he was an explorer pilot from the planet Janos, escorted her to a room where there were 15 to 20 other people. A panel on the wall lit up like a television screen. There were 3 planets on the screen, which he called Sarnia, Saturn and Janos. He explained that Saturn had come too close to Janus and started to disintegrate and shower them with meteorites. A nuclear power station was hit by one and set off a chain reaction which devastated the remainder of their planet Janos.
Oh, here we go. See, this is the 1970s anti-nuclear thing happening. Yeah, the 1970s is the era of nuclear power no thanks stickers.
Yeah. A coloured picture of a young blonde woman with a small boy and a girl flashed on the screen. Uxulia said they were his wife and children who had died during the nuclear explosion. He said that explorer ships from the master base ship had been sent to find a new home for their people and they would like to live on Earth. Anuxia shook hands with John and kissed the woman on the cheek, then indicated they should step out through the open hatch. Before they left, Anuxia said, "You must forget because you will be exploited. In time you will remember. We will meet again and you will know us."
And they might talk about you on a podcast.
Yeah.
I tell you who I do believe is the witnesses who saw something. What I don't believe is what those aliens being aliens. That is absolute... Yeah. The fact they've all got names, they have daughters, they have sons and daughters, children is what you call them, wives, a desolated planet, nuclear power that blew up. How are they powering the ship if they're using old-fashioned nuclear power stations? Yeah. What energy are they using to make the nuclear... what energy are they using to make the ship work if it wouldn't be nuclear, I'm assuming? I mean, that would be a very daft way of powering an interstellar spacecraft. All of that sounds like either something pretending to be something else or a screen on top of something much more sinister.
Yeah, and I think also the thing that struck me, and I did a bit of Googling of the names just to see if I could come across any references. So, some of the names used of the aliens are like, oh, well, there's a place in Sardinia that's got that name or whatever. But they also seem... we've said this on the podcast before, they seem very like what you would call an alien if you were writing a sci-fi story
in the 50s or 60s. This is straight out of what's it, Lost in Space. It's absolutely out of that.
Anuxia, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's the sort of woman that Captain Kirk would have a crush on.
Yeah, exactly.
And she'd be exactly human, but she'd have 2 very small differences on her head.
Yeah.
This is... I just don't buy it. I don't buy it at all.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that this is a very British UFO encounter, perhaps because it happened near where we live. It reminded me of the Travis Walton case, Fire in the Sky, but without the Hollywood kind of shine to it. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely, yeah.
Firstly, the fact that they drove through Cirencester.
There's a great coffee shop there. There really is.
Well, maybe that's why the UFO didn't fly there, because it was getting a coffee.
Yeah.
Secondly, unlike the Travis case, that was all invasive probes and terror.
Yes.
The whole potential encounter on board this alien ship seemed in comparison far more civilised, didn't it?
Very civilised. But what is it with showing you a film? They always show you a film.
With a whole backstory, an informative documentary of their home planet. Okay, I mean, I guess they did try and wipe their memories, but they said they were doing it to protect them from being exploited. So that seems a very British thing to do as well.
It's a very convenient thing to say.
Well, I like you, then thought, okay, let's take this from a skeptic point of view. And in my reading of it, this story really divides into two sections. There's the family reporting that they saw this strange object in the sky and that it followed them. Then they were on a road different from where they originally been. They'd lost time. They'd been a time slip. Some of them also had strange markings on their body, and that was kind of their first-hand experience. But I think you've got to remember that the being taken on board the craft, being examined, meeting the aliens, gave them the story of why they were on Earth. That all came about in dreams or under hypnosis. And as we've covered before, that can be really problematic.
Yeah, really problematic. But also, there's an element of, if you have to get to it through there, it's like you have to assume the aliens don't know that you can, and that they can't put in another sort of mechanism to stop you coming up with the real goods.
Yeah.
The whole thing seems preposterous.
Yeah, bizarre. The second very British UFO encounter takes us up to Scotland, Ben, and it has been called the incident at Dechmont Woods. I don't know if you've heard of this.
No.
This is amazing. For me, what gives it a very British feel is not necessarily what happened, but the person that it happened to, a man called Robert Taylor. And as you'll see, he's one of the most unlikely candidates for a UFO encounter. So this incident was investigated by Malcolm Robinson, who we discussed on our episode about Bonnybridge UFO wave, if you remember.
Oh, yes, good one.
And I think you've interviewed him, haven't you, in the past?
I believe so, yeah, many years ago.
So this event happened just over a year after the last story that we had from Oxford. It happened on November the 9th, 1979. So Robert Taylor was employed by the Livingston Development Corporation as a foreman forester, and he was driving his pickup truck along with his dog Lara to an area of forest known as Dechmont. So it was a cold early morning. Taylor had to park up his truck and continue on foot into the forest as his truck was struggling in the muddy conditions. So around 10 a.m, Robert rounded a corner in the forest and was now in a clearing. Robert knew this bit of the forest really well, and on this cold morning he was out looking for stray sheep. I guess that's what you do as a forester, right?
Yeah.
He suddenly spotted a large dome-shaped object hovering above the grass. It was a vision he'd never encountered in his life. He described the object as dark grey all over, roughly textured and completely silent. It had a flange going around its circumference, and sticking up from this rim were several spikes. Robert actually described them as looking like propellers, but they didn't move.
Oh my goodness! You see, we've got a like a steampunk UFO.
Yeah.
This is my exact theory on this. Anyway, yes. Sorry, I interrupted.
Well, it gets more steampunky, actually. He also noticed above the flange several dark circular spaces, which he felt looked like windows. While transfixed on the object in front of him, Robert noticed that part of the object seemed to disappear. He could see the trees behind the hull of the object, then the hull would solidify again, then go translucent and solidify. That, I started thinking very much about those kind of gravity propulsion systems that we've heard
Bob
from
Lazar.
Bob Lazar.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this was way before Bob Lazar's time.
Yeah, and also that would have sounded like, I think, peculiar technology in those times. But now we know, you have fridge doors that become clear at the touch of a button.
Right, yeah.
The tap, or, the glasses I'm wearing change colour in the sun. But what do you say? This is 50s?
70s.
70s. Oh, well, it would have still been sort of futuristic. It would have been as futuristic as like a digital watch. It would have been that level. Yeah.
So the only sound was that of his dog next to him, barking furiously. So if that wasn't weird enough, things got even more scary. This again, you'll pick up on this. Suddenly, what resembled Second World War sea mines dropped from beneath the main object and rushed towards him. Robert said the colour and texture of these spheres were the same as the main craft. As the spheres came towards him, their spikes made a strange sucking or plopping noise, he described it as, on the grass. Soon both balls were either side of Robert, and a spike from each ball attached itself to each side of his trousers just below the pockets. He then felt himself being pulled with force towards the main craft. While this was happening, Robert smelt a powerful odour in the air, which he described as smelling like burning brake linings, an acrid smell he could taste in the back of his mouth. And we've covered that before when we've done the kind of supernatural and UFO smells. It's very often.
We have, yeah.
The smell was accompanied by a sound similar to that of a cane swished through the air. It was at this point that Robert passed out. I'm not sure how they know this, but in the account I read, it was estimated that Robert was unconscious for around 20 minutes. When he awoke, he was initially unable to speak and had lost movement in his legs. He also had a dry throat, extreme headache, felt sick, and had a burning sensation on his chin. After a few minutes, he managed to crawl back to his truck, was unable to radio for help because his speech had not returned. His truck was stuck in the mud, so he decided to walk back through the fields and woods to his house, arriving home at 11:15 a.m. When Robert's wife first saw her husband, she initially thought he'd been assaulted. Such was the state and distress he was in, plus his clothes were all torn and muddy. As his voice was beginning to return, Robert managed to tell his wife that he had seen a spaceship in the woods.
Okay, there's a lot there.
Well, there's more. Much more. Thinking he must be confused, his wife telephoned her husband's boss, Mr. Malcolm Drummond, and also telephoned their local doctor, Mr. Gordon Adams. It wasn't long before both arrived, and Robert proceeded to tell them what he had encountered in the woods. Listening to this incredible tale unfold, both men were startled to hear Robert's description of what he'd encountered. Both men knew him well enough to state that Robert was not a teller of tall tales or would invent things just for the fun of it. They described Robert, as a sound and rational man, a man not prone to invention, a man with no interest whatsoever in flying saucers or men from Mars. That was not his agenda. After a preliminary examination, it was concluded that Robert was not suffering from any head injuries or neurological disorders. His blood pressure was normal, and apart from a graze on his chin and signs of shock, he appeared fine. As a precaution, he was admitted to the local hospital for a full checkup. So while Robert was at the hospital, his manager Malcolm Drummond and some other forestry workers went to Dechmont Woods to inspect the scene of the incident. An account of what they viewed was published in an article by Stuart Campbell, who was a UFO researcher. He said, surrounding the tracks were 40 holes exposing fresh earth. Each hole was about 10 centimetres across, no more than 10 centimetres deep. The holes did not have any particular shape and did not appear to have been made by an artefact or tool. The earth in the holes was not compressed. New growth in 1980 showed no sign of the marks nor any other defect. They also noticed 2 track line marks, so backing up his story about how he'd been dragged along. Now, the author and ufologist Malcolm Robertson interviewed Robert Taylor pretty soon after the incident. Robert took Robinson to the location of the incident. By this time, it had been roped off by the police. Before they left the site, so there was another investigator with them called Andrew Collins. And interestingly, he said he'd seen a very similar case or heard of a similar case from South America. He said, this is his exact words, "You know, Malcolm, I'm aware of a similar case to this one. It occurred in South America a few years back. A similar object was seen, and also these 2 small spherical balls as well. But in that case, the difference was those 2 spherical balls rushed out from the larger object, then proceeded to explode in front of the witness. Thank goodness this didn't happen here."
Goodness. Wow.
And again, that's quite punky, isn't it? Those balls and the description of them, I found. So I mentioned police tape roping off the area of the incident. So the police did investigate. including sending forensic experts to the scene, which I think is quite important.
Yeah.
And they also examined Robert's clothing. The police forensic expert examined the holes made in Robert's trousers, which Robert claimed were from the spikes of this strange orb. The expert concluded the holes were not made by burning and were likely achieved, this is interesting, by a strong mechanical pull upwards.
Right, just as he'd described.
Yeah. Robert's underwear, he was wearing long johns, remember it was Scotland, it was pretty cold, were also torn. They showed an S-shaped hole on the outside of the left leg, which corresponded to the tear in Robert's trousers. This is fascinating as well. The police concluded that Robert had not fabricated the incident. Detective Sergeant Ian Walk of Livingston Police was convinced of the testimony of Robert Taylor. He said that he had found Mr. Taylor to have been a sound mind and never altered from his story. Detective Walk could not explain the marks left on the grass, and the whole incident had left him completely baffled.
So why did the police get involved anyway?
Well, I think this guy, who's a kind of just upstanding member of the community, comes back and says, I've been attacked by this thing, you know, and the wife calls the boss and the doctor, and I think they just informed the police saying, look, this guy's, something's happened to him, can you go and check it out?
Right, I see. So they weren't sort of... they didn't call the police because they thought this guy is lying.
No.
They were genuinely worried for his health.
Yeah.
Right, I see.
And what had gone on. Well, should we look at... There are some sceptical viewpoints or other explanations outside of a UFO encounter. And I guess a potential abduction. That's the kind of implication as well. There is a theory that Robert encountered a rare natural phenomenon known as black ball lightning, which can be caused by lightning striking the ground and then, I guess, forming into a ball. So that could explain the spheres, I guess. Now, there is another theory put forward by Stuart Campbell, which I find a bit harder to get my head round, but this guy's a UFO investigator. He says that Robert, he believed, had seen a mirage of the planet Venus, and that the strange mirage had caused Robert to suffer an epileptic seizure. Campbell wrote, I decided to try the astronomical hypothesis on the Livingston case. Despite the fact the incident occurred in broad daylight, the result was surprising. This may mean something to somebody, but it doesn't mean a lot to me, but I'll say it anyway for those of you geekies out there. Venus, a magnitude of 3.7, lay at only 3 degrees altitude, 3 degrees 13 minutes with normal refraction, on a bearing of 138 degrees, almost precisely the direction in which Taylor was looking. Moreover, Mercury was at 2 degrees 15 minutes with a normal refraction, on a bearing of 139 degrees, i.e. they were in close conjunction. Could the incident have been initiated by the sight of Venus and Mercury? The close alignment of the two planets could have caused a superior mirage. This can result from atmospheric temperature inversions where cold air underlies warmer air. However, it is also the close proximity of the planet Mercury to Venus which also assists this mirage effect to become more prominent. Stewart goes on to speculate in his article that the inversion and the sudden brightening of such lights seen through inversions could appear to rush towards the observer, I guess explaining the idea of the two balls. There were two planets. Stewart believes they were in fact the balls where the planets Venus and Mercury. The spiky rods on these light planets were in actual fact caused by distortion in the eye. This resulted in Robert having an epileptic seizure.
Okay, I mean, that does sound credible, but what kind of, I mean, has this happened before? I mean, I'd like to know whether anyone has happened to somebody before. Was he known for having epilepsy?
No. Well, Robert Taylor himself dismissed those theories. In a letter he wrote to the ufologist Malcolm Robinson in 1988, he said, "I can still see everything that happened that morning, just as if it were yesterday. So there is no way that any silly stories of ball lightning or Venus peeping over Deer Hill can change my mind. I remember, Malcolm, that you were up at Decmont Woods the day after the incident and saw all the markings on the ground. Just think, if you'd been within 10 yards of this vehicle and were even in contact with part of it, all the research will make no difference. I don't expect to see anything like this again.
So he's convinced it's paranormal.
Yes, and there were also other reports from witnesses in the area who claimed to have seen UFOs on that morning.
Right. The clothing thing is very weird. It strikes me as being very similar to that case of it was, I can't remember his surname, but I can remember his surname. Strangely, it was Adamski, not that one, but the other one,
right,
who was found upon a pile of coal by the policeman.
Yes, I remember that story.
Yeah, I think it's been well covered. I think even the BBC have covered that one. But the fact is that his clothes were absolutely pristine.
Yeah.
When he could have, when he should have been scrambling up coal and they should have been black.
Yes.
So this sort of, it made me think of that. I know it's a slightly different circumstance.
Yeah, but it's similar.
But this time they tore his clothes. Usually in these circumstances, they sort of remove people's clothes, then put them back on again. But sometimes you get the wrong person's clothes, or the T-shirt's on back to front or something because the aliens aren't very good at redressing you.
Yeah.
But this just seems like an accident in the transfer.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really intriguing about this story, aside from the incredible description that Robert gave, is Robert himself. So here we've got a 61-year-old man, absolutely no interest in UFOs or science fiction. He works at the Scottish equivalent of a park ranger. He's in a location he's totally familiar with, just looking for stray sheep, and he has this incredible experience. I mean, he didn't want the media attention that came after the encounter. In fact, there's this great bit where he checks himself out of the hospital before all the tests could be completed, because he'd promised his wife that he was going to take her to the seaside that weekend.
Oh, man.
He just wanted to get on with his life. So you got this rational guy whose testimony was deemed genuine and credible by the police, still sticks to his story and doesn't accept the alternative theories that were put forward.
Yeah, and he stuck with that story for the rest of his life, I assume.
Yep.
Yeah, these things are so common and the details are so incredibly strange that I suppose the reason why these things haven't got turned into, Lifetime miniseries or whatever is just because there's a tendency in Britain, it's quite hard to explain, but particularly in the 70s and 80s, people would go, oh, yeah, that fella, he got taken by a UFO.
Yeah,
Did he? You should buy him a pint, he'll tell you.
Well, also, this guy, Robert, you can see it, from a Hollywood casting point of view. If you go with the Travis case, you're going to be going, we got to have Ryan Gosling. This guy, you'd have to have Pete Postlethwaite. Do you know what I mean? It's very British. It
is. It's Coronation Street does alien abductions.
Yeah.
But, it's all of those bits are so curious because we don't see those same tropes happening today. We see something other. We don't, we keep talking about it. We have craft that looks steampunk. We have warnings about nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and then now we have this is your daughter, this is your son. It's very much more. It focuses on the breeding program. Yeah. Now I wonder again whether this is deeply rooted in, is this people's sort of concern about immigration and that sort, those sorts of troubling things that people talk about.
Yeah.
That are mirrored in that. And if they are, once again, I say I very much am concerned. One of the things, and again, we don't push forward any particular theories here, but one of the reasons that after sort of reading around it that I understand it's so difficult for Congress to accept that there might be alien craft is that there's quite a lot of people who think they're demons.
Right.
And they're not the only ones.
Right. Well, within Congress or just anywhere, right?
Well, yeah, just within anywhere, yeah.
So it's got some biblical connotation.
Well, not maybe biblical, but maybe these things are not visitors from outer space. Maybe they're supernatural beings with another, unknowable thing that they're trying to do. Because I just can't think of why you would do that to some men, not 20 miles from here in the 70s and then stop doing it.
Yeah.
None of it makes any good sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, this all led me, because I started thinking, Ben, we found quite a lot of stuff in the CIA archives. So I thought I'd try and go through the British equivalent to see if we might find some stuff there.
Oh, good shout, yeah.
So I've been trading through the British National Archives. Now, unlike the CIA, much of the documentation is not set for release to the public for a number of years. But I did come across a file called Air 2, UFO Reports. Now, this information in the file is from the 1960s, and rather than a report, is a random selection of letters and documents relating to UFO encounters. And I mean, it's mostly that, but then I came across, there were a few kind of news clippings in there, not many, but there was one clipping about one of the early UFO contact societies, or I guess UFO religions, that was formed right here in the UK. Now, it's a society we've mentioned on the podcast before when we interviewed Tommy Trelawney. The society was founded by a man called Dr. George King in the 1950s after he claimed he was contacted by an extraterrestrial intelligence known as Aetherius.
Yes.
So in this government file, I came across a news clipping that was published in the Guardian newspaper on the 15th of November in 1965. The title of the article is Friends in Flying Saucers.
Nice.
And it does discuss the Aetherius Society. The article says, only about 36 Earth persons seized the opportunity in Barnsley at the weekend of hearing the messages from highly advanced intelligences in outer space, as relayed through the planet's primary terrestrial channel, which happens to be the larynxes of Dr. George King. According to the Aetherius Society, which arranged this demonstration, these intelligences from outer space cause vibrations in Dr. King's larynxes. The message emerging is not strictly speaking in Dr. King's voice. It is English simply because the brain, or receiving set, and larynx belong to an Englishman. Now, if you're thinking I'd like to hear what that sounds like, Ben.
I definitely want to hear what that sounds like.
Well, I have a short clip from an interview Dr. King did with the BBC in 1958 where he channels an alien being from Venus. Have a listen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My dear friend.
Your name is?
I am known as Aetherius.
Where do you come from?
The planet Venus.
Where are you speaking from now?
I am sorry, my dear friend, I cannot answer that question for you.
I had wondered simply whether you were in a vehicle of some kind, a spaceship described by Mr. King when he was talking to me, or whether you were in your normal abode. But you can't tell me that?
No.
You do travel, normally, in what Mr. King has described as flying saucers when you move about space, do you?
Yes, that is quite correct. We have indeed been visiting this Earth of yours for some 18 million of your Earth years.
Well, I do enjoy the cut glass English that this alien appears to be able to
that is so British, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And it also, it's... so this is kind of the reason we were speaking to Tommy about it, was the idea was that this might have been a sort of a prototype for the voice that came across the Southern Counties transmitter.
Yes, quite
during
right.
the alien the so-called alien transmission.
The takeover,
the takeover. Yeah. And I can see why, but the performance is extraordinary. I particularly like the glasses.
Yes.
He's wearing like blinding glasses.
Yeah, I think he put. I mean, you can't see that on the podcast, but he puts these weird. They're almost like skiers' glasses on, aren't they?
Goggles.
Yeah, completely black.
As if someone's going to be giving him some information that helps him, like pretend to channel an alien. Anyway.
Well, if we return to the Guardian article from 1965, it goes on to say. The Aetherius Society believes that flying saucers are real and their friendly occupants are giving vital information and guidance to mankind. Barnsley on a Saturday night, it says in the article, when any saucer that fly are not usually extraterrestrial, seems an unlikely setting for cosmic correspondence. But Miss Hazel Goldborough, the area organiser for the society, says there is a small but flourishing group of members in the town. She's planning monthly meetings in Leeds, Huddersfield and Barnsley for the playing of tape recordings of voices from outer space as issuing from Dr. King's larynxes. Mr. Michael Park, a committee member of the London headquarters of the Society, said yesterday that Dr. King heard his first extraterrestrial message in 1954. Now, as a chairman of the Society, he is chiefly used as a channel for messaging from Aetherius, an advanced intelligence from Venus and Mars Sector 6, a Martian intelligence. The voices of the Venusians, said Mr. Park, is totally different in tonal quality from that of Mars Sector 6.
Of course it is.
Now, I can't work out why a clipping of that sort is in the file. As the file, like I said, it's primarily UFO sighting reports and then the MOD response to the reports and inquiries. So I don't know why it's there.
Maybe just to provide background and colour.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not going to go through the reports of sightings in the Ministry of Defence files because there are very few that go into great detail. There are some quite, I don't know, there's some ones that, again, feel very British and kind of, I don't know, touched me a little bit. There's some fascinating ones. Let me give you an example. There was a letter to the Ministry of Defence from members of the public from a group of residents in Kensington in London, written on the 2nd of July, 1965. Just says, "Dear Sir, we wish to write to you regarding a lighted foreign object moving in an easterly direction at 12:12 a.m. on Friday, the 2nd of July, 1965, north of Brompton Road. We telephoned the Meteorological Society, who had received many similar calls and who advised us to write to you. We should be very grateful if you would give us any further information concerning this object. Yours faithfully, Judith Bryce, Brenda Schult and Margaret Dale."
And this would be the reason why MUFON formed, I guess, because where do you go?
Well, when you look at the letter, there's some really interesting handwritten notes on it from the Ministry of Defence.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They've circled the time, and the note says, do they mean AM or PM?
Oh, so someone did take it seriously.
Yeah. And then there's another thing that says, insufficient info for valid assessment. If early morning, probably a satellite. Now,
maybe.
What's interesting, Ben, when you go through these files in the 1960s, you come across many letters responding to public inquiries about UFO incidents, and they follow the theme that is pretty consistent to Ministry of Defence letters we've seen before, like the ones from Nick Pope in the 90s. You know, the ones that say the Ministry of Defence investigates reports of unidentified flying objects solely to the extent that it's concerned with the air defence of the United Kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
That's just the classic standard response, right? But going through the files, you realise there was some investigation going on of reports from official sources and the public in the 60s. And there were many replies being sent back to the public who'd written in, who weren't getting that stock message.
And, right, do they include any of those?
Yeah, they're all in there, but they are, you know, you saw likely you saw a satellite or there was some military aircraft at that time.
Okay.
So those MOD letters do provide an answer to what some people have felt they'd seen rather than the stock response. So I suddenly at this point, I don't know if it's the I want to believe part of me, Ben, but I thought, this is a gotcha moment. Because I suddenly thought that when the Ministry of Defence has a rational explanation, certainly in the 60s, they told the public what it was. Satellite, it was Venus, it was a military aircraft. But when something seems more like a genuine UFO, as we'd call it, the MOD would send out the "we don't investigate" letter. Because, maybe it was a genuine case.
So this is obviously the days before Nick Pope.
Yeah.
So they, I guess the UFO desk starts after this time.
Yeah. Now, that was my first reaction. I've got them. This is it. But I guess then a more sceptical part of me kicked in. And I went, well, if the MOD knew what it was, they told the people who'd written in. So they told them it was Venus or whatever, or a military craft. I think you could say the don't investigate letter goes to those where they do a bit of a preliminary investigation and can't progress it due to a lack of information or evidence. So it's one of those two things. At first I thought, this is it, I've cracked it. And then was like, well, actually, you could look at it from a different point of view. But I did feel that there was a different attitude from the American and British military to the UFO phenomena by reading, because reading files from both. Certainly in the 60s, I didn't feel there was a vibe of deliberate disinformation coming from these British files. The files seemed straight up, practical, to the point, I guess very British,
Very British. And where do they actually go to? Is it core MOD or is it Fylingdales or...
Yeah,
does it say?
It doesn't say. Some of them are. There's bits in the files that come from politicians who've been asked by the constituents, and some where people,
nice, yeah.
Ones where people have just written into the MOD directly. I mean, there's a lot in there, but it's not collated. It's not like a report. It's just these random letters and responses. But I certainly they were investigating them to some level, whether you go with they were serious incidents, so they sent out the "we don't investigate" letter, or they just didn't investigate because there wasn't enough information to take it any further. Depends on your perspective, but it seemed very different to a kind of American disinformation approach, certainly back then.
And there was nothing in there that made you sort of stick your ears out. There was nothing extraordinary. It was more like it was just lights in the sky, weird things. Nobody was like writing in saying, my Auntie Doris went for 3 days to Venus.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've only scanned it to a certain degree. There's so much in there, and unlike the American CIA archives, you can't search by topic. You've literally got to click on each image or each number and see what it is. So it's quite a laborious process, but I think I will go back to it and have a look in a bit more detail. But it was just that pattern of, they do investigate. And if they know it's something that they can explain, they were sending letters out even to the public to say, yeah, no, you probably saw a satellite, or you probably saw Venus, or you probably saw this.
Yeah, interesting. I'd love to know I mean, Nick Pope has always said there wasn't a disinformation campaign, but he didn't know everything.
Yeah.
So I guess whoever is responding to this is operating in a similar vein.
Yeah.
And there must have been a point where they were like, well, these people who are employed to do something else are being sidelined for something.
Yeah.
And then you almost see it. I mean, I might be wrong, but you could argue it feels like they mechanized the customer service by bringing Nick Pope in, whereas another bit maybe knows what's going on
Yeah.
and uses it as a decent cover. But That's speculation. I can't possibly know.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I started thinking a lot about Nick Pope, obviously, when I was going through the files, and it's like everybody just asks him about UFO cases and things like that. I was thinking, I'm quite interested to know procedurally how it works and the history of how he thinks it may have changed, because, I don't know, maybe it's the same in the 90s as it was in the 60s, but was there a change? Why was there a change? Just like you're saying, is it operational? Is this is all taking up too much time and we can't investigate anything? Could be as simple as that rather than some big conspiracy.
Yeah, no, I agree. But it starts with these little... I saw a thing, and then I guess presumably they become more numerous. Did you get any idea? Is it just select ones that were in there? Yeah, well, it's quite random in terms of timeline. They're not even in date order.
Oh,
so
really?
You would have to kind of almost go through, print them all out, and there's hundreds of documents in there. So much more to explore. We got very excited when we started delving in the CIA archives. I think the British ones have got some interesting stuff. The problem is you have to go back kind of earlier than you would on the American, because a lot of them are still classified till. So I came across some quite interesting titles and clicked on it, and it was said this is not available until 2045. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I do. Interesting. Very interesting. Oh, well, thank you. That is brilliant. I particularly like the idea of a Venusian speaking with a perfect
yes.
Queen's English. It's not like BBC English.
Yeah, and I like the way, I'm not saying he wasn't channeling a Venusian, but if he wasn't, I like the way he kind of, his weird intonation did make it stranger than it should be with that perfect English accent.
It did a bit. Although, Orville the Duck had a strange intonation. That was definitely a man.
Yeah, that's true.
I say a man, he might have been a Venusian.
Yeah, you spoilt that for me. You really have.
It was a real duck, it's fine.
Well, the other thing I thought, and I guess they must have an answer to it, so the Aetherius Society, he was basically saying back then that these creatures are from Venus and Mars. And I don't know if they still hold that view now. They're still going. They're still a kind of UFO religion. I don't know how they explain that one away. Maybe they say it was all a cover, and that's what I'd probably say. They were saying they were from Venus because we could understand it a little bit better than when they're really from. I guess you can get round it, can't you?
I wonder if these days there'll be lawyers. I wonder if these days it's more about the personality.
Yeah.
Wonderful, very interesting. Let's keep our very British eyes in our very British skies.
I'm slightly worried about you driving home in the dark now, because on the roads where there was all this encounters. Although it will make a good episode for next week, so check it out.
It will, but there's that new 20-mile-an-hour road between your house and my house. If they lift me up and take me over the top of that, I'll be very, very happy.
Yeah.
That is tedious.
Yeah, no, it's quite tedious. Or maybe they'll just give up because it's too slow. I'm not following him, he's too bloody slow.
Well, look, whilst we've been speaking, we've had a Sherlock update.
Oh, God, I've got to get my...
Get the violin. You can do it this week. I was rubbish last week.
I quite liked your play. Hold on. Wait. Right, here we go.
Excellent. So, it was from Nicola. So, Nicola, who came with us ghost hunting.
Oh, yeah?
She said, adding to the Holmes task, I'd like it's a task.
Yeah.
It's more of an experiment, but yes, the task. Taking it very seriously, like a studious person. My mum booked a surprise trip around London yesterday, and guess where we started our evening?
Baker Street.
The Sherlock Holmes pub.
Ah. That's funny, because we did, I think when we launched the Tulpa project, we said, let us know if you're ever in the Sherlock Holmes pub. So this is Nicola, who came with us for the Halloween special when we spent the night in the Swan.
Yes.
She didn't know she was going there. She just...
No.
Wow, that is weird.
It is weird. It is. I've been there. They could do a lot more with it, is all I'm saying. But great. That's perfect.
Good.
We're getting closer to the man. Kath has seen a
Oh,
actual...
yeah, because we had the Deerstalker last week.
We had the
didn't
Deerstalker. We've got our other listener who saw the man,
Yes.
the paranormal investigators.
Yeah.
And now we've got the Sherlock Holmes pub. If we put them all together, we've got an office, the clothing, and
Yeah.
the man.
Yeah.
We just have to assemble him.
Yeah, well, it feels like we're getting somewhere, I think.
It does feel like we're getting somewhere.
Well, if you'd like to keep this TQM Tulpa project to make Sherlock Holmes real going, I guess we started this off by saying, just have a little think about Sherlock for, 4 or 5 minutes if you've got some spare time. And then
watch the film.
Watch the film and then work out whether, anything weird happens to you that is Sherlock related, either coincidences, sightings, or, just suddenly being taken to the Sherlock Holmes pub. Let us know.
I was in the bookshop earlier. I don't think it's a real Tulpa thing, but I walked through the children's section to get to the paranormal section. I was after a specific book. I couldn't find it. But there's something in there called Sherlock Bones. Parents amongst you might know what that is. I have no idea what that is, but I'm not counting it. But yeah,
it sounds like it could be a dog version of Sherlock
I think
Holmes.
it might be a dog version. Yeah. I bet it's a bloodhound too.
Yeah, in a Deerstalker. Well, that's a bit gruesome.
Well, that was what it. If you remember Pigeon Street.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was Watson was the dog, who was a bloodhound, and his owner had a Deerstalker.
There you go.
Yeah, for fans of late 70s, early 80s television in the UK.
We've been very 70s today.
Very 70s.
Well, look, thank you all for listening. We will be back next week with more paranormal on the quantum mechanics. Join us then.
Take care and see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?